Okay, so picture this. A massive empire, one that's been the center of the world for centuries, is starting to crumble. For the Muslims living in 18th and 19th century India, this wasn't just some story. It was their reality. And right in the middle of all that chaos, three very different thinkers step up, each with a unique plan to revive their faith. But here's the big question, and it's what this whole explainer is about. Did their plans actually work? Let's dive in and find out.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at why there was a crisis in the first place. Then we'll meet our three main guys, Shah Waliullah, who you can think of as the architect. Then there's Haji Shariatullah, the grassroots mobilizer. And finally, Syed Barelvi, the commander. And to wrap it all up, we'll deliver our final verdict on just how successful they really were.
All right, let's set the stage. Our story kicks off at a time of huge uncertainty. For hundreds of years, the Mughal Empire was this powerful force that gave Muslims in the subcontinent a sense of stability and identity. But now, it's fallen apart, and that's leaving a massive, dangerous void.
It's a really important question, right? When a power that has held everything together for so long just starts to fade away, it creates a vacuum. And for the Muslims of India, this wasn't just some political headache. It was a crisis of identity. Who were they without the Mughals?
You see, the problem was coming from all sides. Politically, the empire was splintering into pieces, which opened the door for invasions. Socially, a lot of people felt that the core principles of Islam were getting watered down, mixed with local traditions. And kind of looming over all of this was the growing shadow of the British East India Company. It really was a perfect storm, and it's into this storm that our revivalists had to walk.
So, first up, we have Shah Waliullah. Now, he wasn't a military guy or a politician. He was a thinker, a scholar. He looked at all the chaos around him and decided the solution wasn't going to be found on a battlefield, but in people's minds and hearts.
And this quote, it absolutely nails his biggest contribution. At a time when Muslims felt adrift, Shah Waliullah reminded them who they were. His big idea was that if Muslims could just get back to the true, fundamental teachings of Islam, their social and political strength would follow naturally.
So, what was his game plan? Well, first he diagnosed the problem. People had become disconnected from the core texts of their own faith. His solution was, for the time, pretty revolutionary. He translated the Quran into Persian, which was the language of the educated class and the government. For the first time, many leaders could understand it directly. Then he wrote a whopping 51 books to explain Islamic teachings. His whole approach was top-down. You educate the leaders, and that knowledge will trickle down to everyone else.
Now, let's switch gears completely and look at our second thinker, Haji Shariatullah. He basically took the opposite approach. While Shah Waliullah was focusing on the elites in the big cities, Haji Shariatullah went out to the villages of East Bengal and started his revival from the ground up. He launched something called the Faraizi Movement, and the name tells you everything you need to know. Faraiz means the fundamental duties in Islam. His message was really simple: get back to basics. But, and this is super important, he connected this religious revival to social justice. He fought for the rights of poor Muslim farmers who were being exploited by their landlords.
And you can see it had a huge real-world impact. Just look at the difference. Before his movement, these farmers were being taken advantage of, they were disorganized. Afterwards, they were unified, their rights were being protected, and they actually became a political force. This wasn't just theory. This was revival in action at the community level.
And that brings us to our third and final figure, Syed Ahmad Barelvi. He chose a completely different path. If Shah Waliullah was the thinker and Haji Shariatullah was the organizer, Syed Ahmad was the commander. He was a man of direct action.
In his mind, writing books and organizing villages wasn't going to be enough. He saw the problem as political and military oppression, especially from the powerful Sikh Empire in the Punjab, and, of course, the ever-expanding British. For him, the only answer was an armed struggle, what he called his Jihad movement.
This timeline really shows you the dramatic story of his movement. After years of training and preparation, he gathered his followers, the Mujahideen, and went on the offensive. And you know what? He actually had some early successes, which was pretty amazing. But that momentum just couldn't last. Cracks started to show, with disagreements within his own forces, and in 1831, it all came to a tragic end at the Battle of Balakot.
So why did it fall apart? Now, for your exams, this is the kind of analysis you really need to know. First off, the Sikh army was just a stronger, better-equipped force. Simple as that. But the internal problems were just as deadly. There was infighting, arguments over stuff like taxes, And in the end, he just couldn't get the massive, sustained support from the local population that he desperately needed to win. Okay, so this brings us to the final roundup. We've met three very different men with three very different plans. Now it's time to weigh everything and actually deliver a verdict on their success.
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's the one that's probably going to pop up on your exam. And there is no easy yes or no here. The answer is, well, it's complicated. It requires a bit of a closer look, which is exactly what we're about to do.
This table right here is the key to understanding everything. It lays it all out. Look at Shah Waliullah. His success was long-term, it was ideological. He laid the intellectual foundation for future generations. Haji Shariatullah, his success was social and very local. He literally changed lives in East Bengal, but his movement didn't spread much further. And Syed Ahmad Barelvi, let's be real, in military terms, it was a failure. But his success was symbolic. He inspired people and proved that resistance was an option, even if his own attempt didn't last.
So here's the main takeaway. You can't just use one yardstick to measure them all. Success meant something different for each of them. Shah Waliullah succeeded in his intellectual goals. Haji Shariatullah succeeded in his social goals. And while Syed Ahmad Barelvi failed in his military goals, you could argue he succeeded in creating a powerful legacy of resistance. They were all successful in their own way, but they all had very clear limits.
And that leaves us with one final big idea to chew on. It's so easy to look at the immediate results. A movement gets shut down by the British, a battle is lost, and just label them as failures. But what happens if you zoom out? Could it be that these movements weren't failures at all, but were actually the very first steps, the planting of the seeds for unique Muslim identity that would, a century later, grow into the call for an entirely new nation? Were they failures, or were they just the beginning? That's the question I'll leave you with.